Hello everyone. Today we're gonna have a look on the FujiFilm 35mm 1.4 lens. This lens is considered by a lot of people to be one of the best lenses that Fujifilm have ever done, especially when we are talking about the look of the lens. But if we are talking about pure performance, it's definitely not one of the best. We are going to see things on this lens such as purple fringing. We're going to see some green fringing on some of the highlights. We're going to see a little bit loss of sharpness out to the edges. There's definitely lenses that performs worse when it comes to these things, but well, this is not the best performer in that sense. Yet still a lot of people are saying that this lens has a look to it that is amazing. That is, there's something magical to the lens. I tried this lens for a while. I had it for a while, so I kind of got an idea about what the lens does and what it doesn't. I also made a pretty long video where I compared it to the f2 version, and I feel like I want to go back and talk about this lens specifically, because when I did that comparison, which was a ridiculously long video, there was like situations where I preferred the f2 version more than the f1.4, but there was also situations where I definitely preferred the 1.4 version of the lens. But that was maybe more because it provided a better subject isolation for that specific situation. So I felt like I have to go back and have a look on this lens again and make another video about it where I talk more about this lens. So besides the thing that we often see, that purple fringing and those artifacts, it's quite similar to the 56mm 1.2 if you've been shooting with that. However, with the 56mm lens, I clearly see that character and the look that 56mm has, and I don't really see that things with the same clarity on the 1.4 and this 35mm lens. So I decided to, well, first of all, it was a while ago I used this lens, so I decided to put the lens on my camera and use it for a while and see if it sparks some new feelings for me. And well, spoiler alert, it did and it didn't in one way. I still have the same feelings about this lens, which is a feeling that most of the pictures and the images that I got from this lens is images that I really like, and there's a certain feeling to it. But I also feel like, okay, I miss the focus on some situation, and I kind of feel like the 35mm f2 is a really good lens as well, and even if it lacks some of that magical sauce that are claimed to be in the 1.4, I feel like it's good enough. I feel like I would rather prefer to have that weather resistant, that fast autofocus and all those good performing features in comparison with a very nice performing lens as well. However, if I would choose to shoot in a darker environment, well, the 1.4 is obviously nice to have. It's, after all, it's one extra stop of light, so it's pretty useful. But before we talk about the images that this lens is able to render, we have to talk a little bit about the specifications. So let's get the specifications out of the way so we can talk more about the images this lens provides. This lens was one of the first X-mount lenses released back in 2012, and it's still possible to buy as a new lens. Fujifilm says that they designed this lens to have a certain look to it, while some people claim this is just marketing to market a bad performing lens. I don't tend to agree, and a lot of people doesn't agree with this description as well. But notice this, when we come to photographers, there's two kinds of photographers. There's those who like a clean look from a lens without optical flaws, and then there are those who look on the image and the look of the image, and if there is an look of the image that appeals to them, they consider it to be a good lens, even if it's optically not perfect. I suppose both of them are kind of right in their own way. This lens has a solid all-metal construction, and it has a square hood that looks really good on whichever camera you put this lens on. This lens has a more traditional optical design that includes external focusing elements, and the whole lens is actually moving when you're focusing. This makes the lens and the autofocus of this lens slightly slower and louder. However, it's not as loud as internet wants you to believe. It's not gonna bothering anyone. No one is never gonna come up to you and say, hey, your lens is noisy. Nor would the client say, oh, that's a noisy lens. Is it really good? The largest aperture is an f1.4 and it has 7 aperture blades. It has click stops that goes from 1.4 all the way to f16. The click stops, however, is not as firm as I would want them to be, and they are quite easy to accidentally move. It has 8 elements in 6 group with 1 aspherical lens element. The closest focusing distance is 28 cm. The filter diameter is 52 cm. The weight with the cap is 205 grams. There's no weather sealing or any optical image stabilization on this lens. So with all those specifications out of the way, let's talk about the lens and the look of it, because this is what you're gonna buy the lens for. I think it's a perfect lens, or it's a very good lens if you want to shoot people and if you're not bothered by efficiency and time. This lens is a lens you put on your camera because you like the look. Either you like it or you doesn't, because there is flaws on it and it is a compromise to work with this lens. A situation that I came to think about is when I was about to shoot a professional shoot with this lens, and I ended up to stop it down to f2 because I wanted a little bit larger depth of field. And then I asked myself, hey, why do I even work with this lens if I'm going to stop it down? Why don't I just throw on the f2 version, which has a fast and accurate and good performing autofocus? And so I did, because I don't feel like the difference in all situations is that huge between those two lenses. I think in the right situation, this lens is amazing, and the f2 version can't even come near to it in the right situation. But personally, I haven't really figured out exactly where that right situation is, and I think it's something that you're gonna learn the more you work with it. But keep in mind, I think I've done around like 5,000 images with this lens, and normally I figure out how a lens works pretty quickly. I made my living out of photography for 17 years, so I kind of have that experience to get a feel for some equipment pretty quick, and I can compare it to other equipment. But this lens is a little bit hard to wrap my mind around. For some reason, I can't really put my finger on what it is. What I could say though is that the images that I got from this lens is images that I have a strong emotional feeling towards. I really like the images. It looks good. There is a good feeling to the images. But then again, I also get that emotional feeling from the f2 version. So that's why it's so hard for me to wrap my mind around it. If we would just bring in another 35mm lens, which would maybe be the call size 1.8 to it, which is a planar design. Well, it's so obvious because it's a planar design. Everything with a planar design is unique for a planar design. This uniqueness is nothing that you find on the 35mm 1.4 from Fujifilm. It's pretty similar to the f2 version in many cases, but in many cases it's also pretty different. But it's not super obvious where the difference is and when it is. But know for sure when it is, it's something beautiful you get from it. So the question is is this lens worth picking up? And the answer on that question is an absolute yes. It's a unique lens, which I think it's a nice lens to have in your arsenal, especially if you shoot a lot of people, because it renders skin tones in a very nice way, and it has that look, it has that character. If you enjoy shooting black and white pictures, it's outstanding. I mean, there's a reason why you've seen so many black and white pictures in my review on it. This has been one of those lenses that I prefer to put on my camera if I'm gonna shoot black and white, especially in combination with the X Pro 1. However, I sold my version of the lens. The only reason for that is because I need to sell it in order to get new lenses, in order to make more videos. However, this is a lens that I sold with a regret, and I know for sure that I want this lens back one day. Another thing that says a lot about the lens and the character it has is if I would considering to use this lens on a professional shoot. And yes, absolutely, I've done it, and I would do it again any day a week. But it's hard to not be talking about the versatility that you get from the f2 version. So it is in certain situations where I would pick up this lens. Those situations tends sometimes to be when that aperture of a 1.4 is required and something that is good. What crew say about using this lens for filming? Well, I would say no. It's a big no. The autofocus in continuous autofocus is not good at all. For that, I would stick to the f2 version. You could focus it manually, and also since it has this older lens design with moving elements, it would be possible to rehouse this lens and into like a cinema house, which would be an interesting thing. I think this lens would be an amazing Super 35 lens to shoot film with, because it has the look that is just right for film. So yeah, you could use it for film. It's probably not the best one, but it has a look. So sometimes for films you do the compromise, and the same goes for shooting stills with this lens. You do the compromise to get the look. If you like this kind of content and you want to see more content, click here to subscribe, and click here to see a full playlist relative to film and photo stops. Thanks for watching, and I see you later.